Oh, oh yeah.
Yes, so today we are gonna make cast iron, white cast iron. Um,
So let's have a look what we have here in our crucible. That's our mixture that is currently baking here in order to get us that cast iron. So in the end we're gonna end up with something like this, a bar of white cast iron. And yeah, we start with a mixture like that one. So that is a mixture for white cast iron, and you see that is about, yeah, for 1 kilogram 950 parts iron powder, so pure iron powder, 50 grams of graphite, and 25 grams of baking powder, which equals more or less pure sodium phosphate. That is in order to help the smelting process and also to make the cast iron more liquid here, to reduce essentially the melting point a bit and make it more fluid. Yeah, so you put it all in a graphite crucible, a special kind of graphite crucible I'm going to show you in a minute. So let's see. So that is essentially a 3 kilogram graphite crucible like that one, and that is covered with a thin layer, that got covered with a thin layer of ceramic wool, so insulating ceramic wool, high temperature resistant up to 1400 degrees centigrades. So what we got here, that is, yeah, about 1/4 of an inch of that high temperature resistant wool, and then just a thin layer of high temperature resistant clay, essentially. Yeah, then put that all in your coil. You know, that is, you see that is a 6 millimeter copper tube, water cooled, so the water is flowing through that. On the inside we got here a 5-gallon bucket with water that is sufficient to cool that. You see there's some temperature coming through, but that won't matter that much. Then yeah, 5 or 6 turnings on that coil, and then you put your crucible in that coil and fill it up with your white cast iron mixture, and then you're gonna heat it up for, yeah, that took about 20 minutes or so. Yeah, and yeah, so as the temperature is rising, that iron powder is gonna combine with the graphite, carburizing that iron, and then slowly forming our cast iron. Gotta steer it from time to time, but you see that the level is dropping here, so that shows us that slowly the iron is melting, forming that cast iron. Yeah, so let's wait a bit more, and then we should be able to extract our liquid iron out of that crucible. Yeah, one drawback when making cast iron yourself is that you have to start, or if you want to get white cast iron, which is the cast iron I prefer, since it's the historic type of cast iron. That gray cast iron, that is a more recent invention or like a development, because in that ancient furnaces people were not able to get that high a temperature, so that you got that enrichment in silicon. Both of them, the gray and the white cast iron, they're easy to cast, yeah, but if you're gonna go to the next step and improve your cast iron by heat treating it, so essentially by tempering your iron, then you usually want to start with white cast iron, because then you just burn your carbon and then you end up with a more or less pure iron or some type of steel. And when you start with gray cast iron, then you have this silicon inside and forming silicon dioxide there in your iron, and that is not something you want there. So you want to start with white cast iron, and that is really this is not so easy to come by nowadays. So that's why I end up making it myself. But it's more or less straightforward. But what I want to say is, when you make that in your induction heater, and you do it in a graphite crucible. I mean, yeah, of course, you mix iron with graphite powder in order to carburize your iron, and guess what happens? Yeah, also the iron is not so selective. Just taking the carbon out of your graphite powder is also taking the iron, the graphite out of your graphite crucible. Yeah, so essentially gonna destroy slowly or about more or less rapidly your graphite crucible, and they are not that cheap. So yeah, you have to be aware that if you're gonna do this at home, then you will go through quite a few of those graphite crucibles. Such a 3 kilogram graphite crucible, they're gonna last for a lot of 6, 7, maybe 8 smelts. So if you're lucky, but then the walls, they start to get weaker and thinner, and just at some point you're gonna end up with some holes here. So let's see. So the wattage, the power dropped here 1600. So that seems to be almost ready for extraction. So in a second. Let's have a look what happens here. So yeah, it is almost, you're almost there. So you can already see here at the bottom end of the crucible. So the layer dropped considerably. I don't know if you're gonna see that, but here there is virtually nothing left of our mixture. Everything has consolidated on the bottom of the crucible. So we almost there and ready to get our iron out of there. So I'm gonna wait a little bit more to let that iron really heat up and that everything gets really nice liquid and molten, and also to I'm gonna remove all the residue on the inside here, so that everything is gonna drop down here in our crucible to the bottom, so everything gets melted up. And yeah, so let's prepare our pour. You should not heat that iron too hot. There's always a risk that you burn off the carbon if you get it too hot. So you want to get it just right. I mean, of course, the best would be to have like a gas forge or something like that, yeah, so that you have really reducing atmosphere. But I don't have that. I have only in my small workshop. I don't want to have like propane flames rolling out of my garage here. So with an induction heater, that is a very convenient way. Just the click of a button. That with good insulation, you won't heat up your water too much. So a 5-gallon bucket with water is sufficient for several cars back to back. So that won't heat up that much here. So. Okay, here I think we are there. So let me stop the electricity. Let's extract our crucible out of that coil. Yeah. And put it in a ring. Perfect. So yeah, we are ready to pour our iron out of here. So let's see what we got. Sometimes there's a layer of dirt on top. Oh yeah, like a huge blob of iron came out of here. Here, yeah, but don't worry too much about that, so that we're not perfectly straight here, but we got a good piece, good load here of liquid iron. That got some temperature. You saw how
sticky it was, yeah, when I attempted to pour out of that crucible. So that is usually because there are still some slag and so associated with that. So it's not really a homogeneous piece of material. So but after you're gonna melt that again, then you typically end up with something like that. So that is a much more pure white cast iron. Okay, the crucible still looks good, no holes, nothing visible, so should be good for a second melt. Oh yeah, some hail. Look at that. Yeah. Okay, but we are in our nice cozy warm workshop here, so yeah, let's fill up the crucible with some more of that powder. Yes. So 2,300 whatever watts, but it's gonna drop by 500 watts or so once the iron is about to melt or already molten. So that is a good indicator when you should check on your iron. Oh yeah, that is really liquid. So I think we should now be better prepared and get a better pour out of that. So let me look if I can get you look into that. You will probably not see much here. There's not much to see here. So I can assure you it's really hard, and there's liquid iron on the bottom covered with some slag and residue from that melt. Stop power. Ring there. Good, let's see what we got this time. Oh, this looks much better than last time. You see, there's still some kind of chunk inside. I mean, the crucible is not perfect there. It got already quite thin, the crucible, so I would not be surprised if after that cast we're gonna see a hole in our crucible. Yeah, see how it starts glowing here, so that is already suspicious for that the wall of that graphite crucible got really thin here. So there is not really a good way in preventing that. So I tried all sorts of things like covering the graphite crucible from inside with a heat resistant clay, but then this insulates too much, and also it does not really hold well to the inside of the crucible. So after some time it just crumbles, and that just then get mixed up with your iron, and so it's just all a mess. So on them for a good price, I recommend buying at least 3 or 4 of them. So yeah, you see that looks much better now. So we were not there with the temperature yet, so not completely homogenized. Well, that looks like it should look. So yeah, sorry for that Murphy thing in the beginning. So that is how I would expect it to pour out of your crucible the first time. And we get here that nice, beautiful piece of cast iron, white cast iron. Yeah, and you see it is really liquid. Once you get it really hot, it's very liquid. It behaves just like, I would say, bronze. They're really similar to bronze, and you can cast almost virtually everything. You can cast with bronze. You can cast with white cast iron. Of course, the differences in the material are as you would expect. I mean, bronze is a little bit more tough and springy, and but it also bends, yeah, which is sometimes you want it that it bends, yeah, sometimes it's not so good that it bends. Whereas the cast iron get a really hard piece that won't bend. That is very good if you want something that is good for like resisting constant pressure. Or, so everything that you won't be flexible is good to make it in cast iron, and everything you want to be tough and springy, then I would recommend bronze. Yeah, if you aim to cast something, of course. Um, yeah, so I would say cast iron is definitely not an inferior material. It's just it has its pros and cons. Yeah, just like every material has pros and cons. So it's just another material you are able to cast with an induction heater. Just be aware that the shrinkage on cooling is considerably higher than with bronze. I think with cast irons about with white cast irons about 6%. So all the risers they make them thicker so that you get sufficient material there in place, so that up on consolidation of the metal, up on cooling, that the shrinkage is that you can like this to make up for that loss in volume. So that is the most important thing you should consider. Everything else is just like common casting thing. See it. In the beginning, it's really when it starts to cool, it gets pastry consistence, and then once it's really solid, it's really much like bronze. Here it's an alloy with not a fixed melting point, but like a melting range.
Yeah, so the ancient Chinese, they were the first people known to melt iron. So about like 400 BC or so, they in China that was very different story than it was, for example, in Europe. So the Chinese, they used bronze for a much longer time than people did in, for example, in the Near East or in Europe. So up to 600 BC or so, we see a widespread use of bronze for all kinds of weapons and tools. So up to the beginning of the Warring States period, at least according to our current knowledge, bronze was a preferred material in China for making all sorts of things. Since China, as long as people can remember, China was always highly populated area, so mass production was always a thing in China from the very beginning of Chinese history. So what is easier to do? To forge each piece or to cast each piece? Of course, casting is much more easier. You can. That is really the way to go if you want to mass produce items, weapons, for example. So if you can cast, that is always better and the most preferable method. The preferable method than forging. So that is what the Chinese had in mind when they used bronze for such a long time. Since bronze is just much easier to mass produce, easier to recycle, bronze got replaced by iron. But only after the Chinese managed to melt iron, which was quite a huge step. Since, for example, in Europe, people only learned to smelt iron somewhere in the late medieval period. So the Chinese were already 1,000 years before that they were able to
melt iron, yeah, to create cast iron essentially. And they actually used that cast iron for making tools and weapons and all sorts of things, since they learned if you subject items made from cast iron to high temperatures for a long time, then you can, in a solid state, decarburize your cast iron and get a kind of steel or even soft iron out of that. So what they did, they for example, they cast knives out of bronze, or even swords out of not of bronze but from cast iron, which of course were too brittle for practical use. But then they put those sword blades in a big furnace and they heated that up for several days in a slightly oxidizing atmosphere, and by that they burned the carbon out of the iron by a diffusion process. Carbon gets constantly burned off from the surface, and then the carbon atoms slowly wander through the metal to the surface, where they get then converted to carbon dioxide or whatever. So by that process, if you heat up the iron to 900 centigrades or so for several days in a slightly oxidizing atmosphere, you can convert your white cast iron to steel. Yeah, that is in short the story about cast iron in China. So I would like to show you here. This is a blade I cast from that white cast iron, and then I put that blade in that crucible here, that is also heat resistant clay crucible I made myself. I filled that with sand, just with plain sand, and then I put that knife there inside the sand, and then I put that blade in my furnace here, my electric furnace, for 6 hours at 950 centigrades, and that essentially removed the carbon from out of the surface of the knife, and also by a diffusion process reduce the the overall content of carbon in that blade, converting it essentially into steel. So, and you can see now this got now a solid and no more I would say like a fragile piece of cast iron. It is now a piece of solid steel. Maybe in the thick parts in the center there's still some residual white cast iron, but since the surface is now steel, I can also show it here, you know, that we're turning. Yeah, you see now that was not so good to see here, but essentially that is now, that got converted to steel. Yeah, we also cast the X blade here. Also did the same heat treatment. So this is a cast blade from white cast iron, heat treated for 6 hours or so at 950 centigrades. Yeah. So this also got converted on the surface into steel. So this also makes now quite a robust piece of iron. Yeah, so you can use your cast iron, your white cast iron, to cast knife blades, and you just need some type of furnace in order to heat that iron up later again for some hours maybe, or if you want to go top notch here for maybe some days, but then you have to make sure, of course, that there's not much access to that the iron does not get subjected to too much oxygen, since then you would just not only burn your carbon but also your iron. But for example, with a slight heat treatment of just 3 to 6 hours in a slightly oxidizing atmosphere, this really enables you to make or convert your white cast iron to steel, at least on the surface. And I think the penetration is about 1 millimeter per 24 hours at about 900
degrees Celsius, so you can do the math there. So if you have a thick material, then you just need to subject it to that temperature for a longer time. If you have a thin blade, then some hours may already do the trick in order to get a solid piece of steel. Yeah. So that's all about cast iron for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. You could learn a bit, and so if you're curious to work with cast iron, I can only recommend getting an induction heater and start experimenting with that. So it's really, I would say, a straightforward method. Okay, then yeah, have a great day. See you.